You had to go get an attorney. And paying a retainer for an attorney, that's not inexpensive. And then your attorney's like, we'll get these documents, no problem at all. Like they're your superhero. And they send a notice out. And the next thing you know, there's a notice sent to you. So your attorney says, listen, we're going to have to produce the last 5 years of, your bank statements, your credit cards, your investment accounts, your retirement accounts. Let's not play around. If we play around, that might hurt your credibility. Let's just produce the documents. You know what? I know it says we have to produce it in 45 days. Let's do it in 3 weeks. Let's just give them the documents. And you're like, okay, I'll do it. But then when the time comes when they're supposed to produce your documents, they didn't do it. So what do? Welcome back to Getting Divorced Without Losing Your Mind. I'm Corey Shapiro. I'm really honored you're joining me on this podcast because the goal of this podcast is to help you when you're so activated, when you're so angry, when you're so flooded and you do something you don't realize that there might be really long-term consequences. So this is really important stuff. And today's episode, we're focusing on what happens when they don't produce the discovery. Discovery is document, information. And we're going to get into that. And the big picture is just because you're cooperating, just because you're producing the documents, just because you're producing discovery, doesn't mean the other side will. And when they don't produce the documents, and then you might want to withhold your documents, that's not necessarily the right way. That's retaliation. And it's going to maybe hurt your credibility. And a lot of these divorce cases are all about credibility. So let me give you some concepts and definitions so you make sure you understand this, because we're getting into the weeds now. I know we spend most of the time on phase 1, which is get clarity. That's the most important. That's what we focus on this podcast. But I'm giving you ideas on phase 2, which is get going. That's what you do when you hire that lawyer or go to mediation and get this divorce started. And then phase 3, the final phase, which you all want, get your life back. Let me just talk about how getting clear on our vision to get our life back impacts something that's so universal in all divorces, which is getting discovery, getting documents. So there's a couple types of discovery. There's informal discovery. Informal discovery is what you're going to get when you're in mediations or negotiations and there's no court involved, and you just ask for the documents. You just say, hey, let's just exchange tax returns, bank statements, credit cards, investment accounts, retirements. Let's do the last 3 years. You give me yours, I'll give you mine. And for most people, they're just going to do that. Why not? It makes things easy. But there's a subset of people that won't do informal discovery. They might just give you the current statement. Is the current statement enough? It might be. But also, it doesn't show the full picture. It doesn't show if they pre-divorce plan. It doesn't show if they, transferred assets. It doesn't give you a full picture of what's really going on. So then you have to have formal discovery. And formal discovery, unfortunately, I believe you have to have a lawyer. You might be able to actually do it. Actually, that's not true. You might be able to do it self-represented, but you have to be in a divorce case. You have to start a divorce action, and you have to send a notice to the other side. A notice to the other side where you want documents. And there's a certain time frame they have to respond. That's formal discovery. It's a formal discovery notice. There's other devices that we can talk about, but that's what we're focusing on for this episode. And there's a certain time frame they have to produce the documents. So when you serve a notice on them, they'll probably serve a notice on you. You have to produce documents. They have to produce documents. Now, you're listening to this podcast. You want to get your life back, so you produce the documents. You're not playing games. Also, it costs a lot of money. So why do you want to waste time and energy? You did what you had to do. Great. But that doesn't mean the other side's going to do the same. They may delay. They may selectively produce. They may only produce 2 years. Let's say the documents were due in 30 days. They don't produce it 30 days. They don't produce it for 60 days. What's going on? So another concept I want you to understand is there's a default process. It's a little complicated, maybe to give lawyers a job, but the first step is just giving the other side notice that they're in default. They were supposed to produce these documents and they didn't produce them, and they're in default. And another concept I want you to understand is the difference between starting a divorce action, where you just commence a divorce action and then you get Here in New York, you get an index number. So you have a divorce action and actually going to court, seeing a judge, appearing before a judge. And the difference, at least here in New York, every state's a little different in what we call it, is requesting a conference. So you start a divorce action, and that could be enough if everyone's being cooperative. But if there's some problems and you need a judge to do something, you have to request a conference. So you need a judge to make an order. So those are the big concepts. Let me just give you an example just to drive this home. Again, you tried mediation. And if you did try mediation or collaborative divorce, wonderful. That's what you're supposed to do. You're trying to keep the budget low. Your time, money, energy, and emotion. Mediators are going to help you in, I would say, over 90% of divorces, maybe even more, depending if you get a master mediator. They can see through a lot of the issues because a lot of the issues are based on these unresolved issues, these emotional issues that color the divorce, and they can see through all that. But sometimes people can't cooperate for whatever reason in mediation, and your mediation failed because you wanted documents. So then you had to go get an attorney. And paying a retainer for an attorney, that's not inexpensive. So you did that. And then your attorney's like, we'll get these documents, no problem at all. Like they're your superhero. And they send a notice out. And the next thing you know, there's a notice sent to you. So your attorney says, listen, we're going to have to produce the last 5 years of, your bank statements, your credit cards, your investment accounts, your retirement accounts. Let's not play around. If we play around, that might hurt your credibility. Let's just produce the documents. You know what? I know it says we have to produce it in 45 days. Let's do it in 3 weeks. Let's just give them the documents. And you're like, okay, I'll do it. But then when the time comes when they're supposed to produce your documents, they didn't do it. So what do? You got to follow the procedure. That's the key. You got to give them a default notice. And if they still haven't done it, maybe you have to request a conference in the court. Okay. So my paraphrase for today is don't match their delay, build your case. And let me give you some action steps because this happens so often in more complicated divorces. It's like routine. It's almost like, it reminds me of driving on the highway when there's a suggested speed limit, 55 miles an hour, and everyone's going well over it and the cops aren't doing anything. That's sort of how it feels. So if they're just like 2 weeks late, a month late, that's like driving a little bit over the speed limit. Judge isn't really going to do anything. And one other concept I want you to understand is you have to exhaust all other remedies sometimes to get these documents. So in this case, getting bank statements, getting credit card statements, getting retirement assets, if you know where they are, you can have your attorney subpoena them before you go to court. And subpoena is a document you would send to that third party, to that credit card company, to the bank, to the retirement plan, right? Before you go to court. Because if you go to court and you say, hey, they didn't produce these documents, but you were able to serve a subpoena, maybe the court wouldn't like that, especially more busy jurisdictions like New York, where they're just inundated with problems and they want solutions. So let me just give you my lawyer hat here. Another way to do this is you could both agree to exchange documents at a certain time. Then you won't run into this issue. But then what happens if they keep on delaying that time? So let's say you both agreed we'll do a mutual exchange. That's what it's called. We'll do a mutual exchange of documents, 45 days. That 45 days, they say you need another week, another 2 weeks. They just keep delaying. Then you request a conference. So at that point, you haven't produced documents either. So remember, the judge is trying to help the person who's acting in good faith. And my suggestion is if you have a date to exchange, I would exchange it before going to court because you want to look like you're cooperating, you're acting in good faith. And a lot of these divorces come down to who's acting in good faith, who's acting in bad faith, who's more credible, who's even more likable. They're just humans, Judge. So I'm not talking about cases that are far apart, but cases that are close. A lot of it comes down to that in most situations. You got this. I know this is tough, but you got this. And producing documents, getting the discovery is so important because so many people come to me and they say, they have unreported cash or they have this or that. And unless you can prove it in court, the court may not agree with you. You have to prove your case. That's what makes it so hard sometimes going to court and having a trial, and that's why most people settle. All right, you got this. I know this is tough, but you can do this. You can get through this. I believe in you. I'm Corey Shapiro. Thanks for watching.
This podcast offers general information only. It cannot replace legal advice. If you need tailored advice, contact an attorney licensed to practice in your area.